Society Speaker Series. I'm Vincent Rossi, coordinator of the series. Having welcomed you all, I'd ask you all first to please remember to turn off or mute your cell phones for the duration of the program. And next I would like to introduce our Society President, Liz Malarkey, for a brief remark.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And I'm really excited about it today. I think we all know that the Midways are most tourist-friendly. I mean, it's #1 in the city of San Diego. And obviously the same with all of us locals as well. And I learned something last week, too, that I hadn't known before. And we actually do have almost 100 historical museums in our county of one way, shape, or form. And the people who visit, 50% of them are locals. So that's pretty cool also, that we have that big of a bunch of people interested in it. And we're excited today to hear more about the Midway. If any of you have questions, I know we're going to be doing a little question and answer afterward. And we just want to thank all of you for being part of us and coming. And we love to keep your support, and we're working hard to make ends meet. So thank you all for being here. Enjoy.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for your good work and efforts of all the board members to keep our society going. Let me just remind you to mark your calendars for our next program, which will be Saturday, March 8th. Our speaker then will be Kei Oki, the president of the Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego. And her subject will be the Redress Reparations Campaign and the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. So keep that in mind. Today I'm happy to introduce Lara White, the president of the U.S.S. Midway Foundation. She's been the president of that foundation for over 4 years. She's been involved for a number of years in work to help nonprofit organizations, and she has been honored for her work. She's been a recipient of the San Diego Business Journal's Women Who Mean Business Award, and also a recipient of the San Diego Metro Magazine's Top 25 Movers and Shakers in San Diego. So we're very happy to welcome Lara White.
Good morning. I don't know what it means to be a top 25 mover and shaker in San Diego. I think my husband thought maybe it might mean more money, but it doesn't. I am so happy to be here with you all today, and I know you're all familiar with the Midway, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Midway, but mostly about Freedom Park. I am a San Diego native. I grew up here in Carlsbad, and I moved back to Carlsbad when my husband and I had our daughter. There's a thing called free child care when your grandparents live nearby. And so we were living in downtown San Diego, so my commute has reversed. I'm now driving Carlsbad to the Midway. But thankfully, I love it so much, so it's a great place to be. I've grown up doing, the only thing I've ever done is work for nonprofits, organizations like Casa de Amparo, Monarch School, and then an organization called Support the Enlisted Project, STEP. Maybe some of you have heard of STEP, yeah. My father was in the Army. He was a Vietnam veteran, and so growing up here in the military town was obviously very special to us, but I didn't really know what it meant to live in a military town until I went to work for Support the Enlisted Project. Midway happened to be one of our larger funders, and so somehow I made the transition over to Midway, and it's just been an absolute joy to be a part of that organization. And I know you've had some docents come and talk with you a little bit about the Midway, but it definitely is a really special place. I'll tell you, I also didn't know a lot about the Midway. I watched the Battle of the Midway movie prior to my interview, not the original, the second one. And I said to my husband, that ship is in great shape after that battle. And he said, don't say that again. It's not the ship, same ship. Oh, that makes sense. Named after the Battle of Midway. Now I get it. Now you can see why I'm the civilian. So we're going to walk through, and then at the end, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, okay? So I'm hoping I'm out of most of your folks' way. So you guys just heard this, right? We're the #1 tourist destination in San Diego, which is hard for some people to believe. We have been for over 14 years. Higher up in the zoo, Legoland, SeaWorld, We're actually one of the top #1 things to do in the world, according to TripAdvisor. We are in the top 1% of 5-star reviews of anything in the world that TripAdvisor reviews. Pretty cool. We are the #1 naval ship in the world, and we see more guests than the Guggenheim. We are actually in the top 20 most visited museums of any kind in the U.S. We're about 19, 20 every year, with over 1 million visitors a year. The reason we are a successful museum is for 2 reasons, and really 2 reasons only. One is our location, right? If you're familiar with some of the other historical naval ships, some of them are on bases, some of our in places where it's so cold, sometimes they have to close. Some of them are a half an hour drive before you can even see them out there. They're tough to get to. So we're really, really, really lucky with our location. We're what we call a drive-by ship. You don't come to San Diego to plan a trip around the Midway. You come to San Diego and you see the Midway and you go, oh, what's that? That looks cool. And second is our volunteer. No organization has a volunteer base like ours. They make up about 60% of our manual power every year, about $12 million worth of labor every year. If the volunteer society go on strike, the Midway would close. They are required to open the ship, operate the ship, and close the ship every single day. So we're really, really, really grateful. But what that success has allowed us to do, what the philosophy is at the leadership level of the Midway is, we will take in revenue from our guests, and we will pay our bills. We will set money aside for the restoration of the ship, and we will do a really good job preserving this ship. And the rest of those funds are going to go out into the community. And they go out into the community in a whole bunch of different ways. One is through a scholarship-based field trip program that we have called No Child Left Ashore. That brings on children from all over San Diego County, actually even outside of San Diego County, for free on a scholarship basis. We even provide the buses. We pay for the buses, the school buses to come to the ship. That way, any school in the district can come and do a field trip, no matter what their budget is. And we all know budgets are cut left and right when it comes to field trips. We have a scholarship program that brings on teachers during the summer. We give away scholarships, and then the foundation every year gives away anywhere between $500,000 and $750,000 a year to organizations that are working with first responders, veterans, and military families. So it is an extremely generous organization. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. We really believe we're a community asset. We get to park ourselves right downtown, and so we want to make sure that the community, especially our military community, knows how much we love them, we support them, and we value their history here in San Diego. Okay, so Freedom Park. So here's what happened. Does anyone in here work for or have any relatives with the California Coastal Commission? Okay, it's a safe space. So, in 1992, there were a group of folks that thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to put an aircraft carrier in downtown San Diego? 12 years later, the U.S.S. Midway arrived, and there were a lot of folks that were not in support of it, California Coastal Commission being one of them. So if you've ever worked for the California Coastal Commission, you'll know that you'll get a lot of new gray hairs doing it. They are a challenging organization, and they made a requirement. They said, if you and the Port of San Diego, who is our tenant, or we are the tenant of theirs, want to bring this ship here, someday you have to build a park on the pier where you're parked, maybe here. At the time, the Midway was over $8 million in debt. We didn't have bathrooms. We were still kind of figuring out how we're going to get people on the ship, hoping we were going to break even, and we said, build a park on the pier? Sure, no problem. How hard can that be? We're going to tell you, it's really hard to build a park on a pier. This is what we've learned 20 years later. We're grateful we didn't build that park then, because I know we wouldn't be building what we're building now. So we made a promise, Port of San Diego, the U.S.S. Midway came together, we made a promise to build that pier, and now it's time to fulfill that promise. So what we did, it took us 7 years to get our permit, to agree with the California Coastal Commission to get our permit, 7 full years. And in February of 2023, we officially received our conditional use permit to move forward with plans. So what we did is we sat down as an organization and we said, what do we want this to be? It could be a park, that's what the port would build in San Diego, that's all the funds that they would have. But how can we elevate this a little bit more? We are the Midway, we have a strong brand. People are gonna think it's our park anyways, because here's the key thing to know about this park. The Midway does not own it. It is not on an asset. We are only paying for it. Because that is the generosity of the Midway. So we have decided to commit up to $20 million to build this park and fundraise the rest of the dollars. We will then give this asset to the Port of San Diego for the city of San Diego. But we know that the Midway brand is strong and people are going to want to see that Midway brand in this park. So how can we look at a purpose, a mission, and a vision that looks at a compelling story, not just a park? How can we honor our veterans and celebrate our freedoms, right? This woman right here in the middle, if you can see that, her name is Barbara Cox. You might, that last name might be familiar, a company called Cox Communications. Her father founded it and she christened our ship. The Cox family is a very important family to our ship and has been wonderful supporters and advocates of the Midway. And she's going to actually be represented on this pier. So the park actually starts from the Bob Hope Memorial and wraps all the way around to the end of the west end of the pier. The primary work that we're going to talk about today and the funds that we're going to talk about is this 5.5 acres of the actual pier itself. We will eventually tie the landscaping and the technology, which we're going to talk about in a minute, all the way back around to the Bob Hope Memorial. That doesn't need as much work right now, so our focus right now is just here, right here on the pier. So we looked at how can you make an impact in your own community? How can you be an everyday hero in your own community? My dad was a Vietnam veteran. When he was growing up, 10% of Americans were connected to someone in the military in their immediate family, right within their immediate family. Now it's less than 1%, right? There is not that really strong connection to our history, to our heritage, and to how we got to this place where we have these freedoms. And so we were and celebrating it, but also asking how can you be an everyday hero in your own community? You do not have to sign up and go into the military, although I'm sure the Navy and Marine Corps would love us to be recruiting here. That there are other ways that you can be an everyday hero in your own community. So Freedom Park. One of the things that we decided that was going to make this a differentiator was going to be adding technology, right? You hear all this talk about AI, geolocation, how are we going to continue to make these stories relevant? A couple of years ago on a phone call with one of our design companies, there was, I won't tell you how old she was, but there was a young woman on the call, and we were talking about where the park started, the Bob Hope Memorial, and she said, wait a minute, who's Bob Hope? And the rest of us all had a sad moment for a while and realized that some people were born later than others, and thought to ourselves, that's right, who is Bob Hope to this generation, to these next generations? Who's the Bob Hope of their generation? How are we going to put these things in bronze permanently, which is not inexpensive to do, and still allow them to be relevant? I don't know about you, but I often go to parks and read about someone that I have no idea who they were. They could have been a hometown hero, they could have even been a national hero, but I'd never heard of them. And so I'm reading their little tiny story. How can we take those little tiny stories and expand on them, because they're obviously much bigger than a paragraph, but then also how can we make them more diverse? How can we make them more about the community at large and more relevant to the next generations, right? We're going to have to use technology to do that, whether we like it or not. I'm almost 50. Technology was, I said Facebook would never make it. I also said email would never be a thing. So don't take stock tips from me. So this is one of the ways we're going to do it. We're going to create a microsite that allows us to do all sorts of educational things. Maybe you take a walk with a grandchild in 5th grade. You have 5th grade appropriate curriculum that's added to that. You go on a scavenger hunt throughout the park. You're standing at a monument. You're on your phone and a docent pops up and says, I see you're looking at the John Finn Memorial. Let's talk a little bit more about who John Finn was. Maybe there's some video associated with all sorts of exciting things we're going to be able to do with technology, things I don't understand, but they say are very cool and allow us to stay connected. Also, a good thing to know about this park is if you want to go and go on a walk or go have lunch and don't want to have anything to do with any of this, that's okay too, right? It's open space, it's new space down along the Embarcadero that's going to be open to the public, and we want you to be able to enjoy it in that way, of course, too. It's going to be obviously with some of the best views in San Diego. So, just going to walk you through a couple of the big areas on the park. One of them is called the Footsteps of Freedom. It's currently where you drive into the pier. That whole area is going to double in size. I don't know if anyone's been down there recently, but you know the old building that's right there on the pier? Gone. It's totally gone. You can actually see the Midway now, which is pretty cool.
What was that building?
It was the old Navy Supply Corps. Yeah, it was filled with lead and asbestos and filled for tanks and
Okay.
took 7 months to bring down. Yeah. It was filmed horror movies after the 80s, I think. The Footsteps of Freedom that pier is extremely historical. It is where the Navy Supply Corps worked, and they were supplying the Pacific Fleet during World War II. It has a lot of historic significance to our naval history and our aviation history here in San Diego. It's over 100 years old, which of course comes with a ton of problems, but hundreds of thousands of people, soldiers, sailors, family members, civilians, have walked that pier. They were able to wave goodbye to their soldiers and sailors and hopefully welcome them home. We want to tell those stories along that footstep of freedom. It's going to end at one of the largest flags we're legally allowed to have, according to the FAA. This exciting moment here with the sculpture at the end is going to make a really, really, really beautiful photo moment against the backdrop of the Midway, and of course you'll be able to see it flying by in your airplanes. Family and Sacrifice Monument, that woman in the center, is going to be represented by Barbara Cox. One of the things that was really important to the group, the leadership team putting this together, is making sure that women and families were represented. We're getting ready to do a new exhibit on the Midway called Women in the Military, and part of it is about women during World War II who built aircraft carriers, right? Does anyone know how long it takes to build an aircraft carrier now?
Long time.
At least 5 years, at least, closer to 10. Midway was built in 18 months, and about 20% of that workforce was women. Sometimes I get nervous when I hear the Midway was built in 18 months. I'm like, okay, all right, but see, we did a pretty good job then. She's 80 years old this year, and she's looking pretty good. So making sure that women and families and their stories of service and sacrifice are represented is something really important to add to the park. Just another view of the gardens as you look back towards the Midway from the west end, and some walking trails. And then the playgrounds. The playgrounds are going to be right up front, kind of the flat area, a little bit more of a formal area for the park. John Finn, and anyone know who John Finn is? Yes. John Finn was the first medal honor recipient in the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was given his award by Chester Nimitz. John actually inspired us. San Diego native, passed away a couple years ago at his veterans home in Chula Vista, and he inspired the everyday hero concept. Because John said, that damned hero stuff is a bunch of crap. You gotta understand that there's all kinds of heroes, but they don't always get a chance to be in a hero's position. For hours, John manned a machine gun during the attack on Pearl Harbor, despite being wounded 4 times. His story is incredible. If you ever get a chance to look him up, it's pretty phenomenal. He was a pretty cantankerous kind of guy, and he was enlisted. It was also important to this leadership team that not every person in this park is an admiral and an officer, that really, this city is really built on its Navy enlisted folks, and that was somebody that was represented. But again, World War II, not going to relate to generations after ours, right? And so how are we going to be able to talk about who is the John Finn of their generation? Also in this area along the park, I don't have great renderings of it. These are not inexpensive to make, so I apologize. Is going to be where we're going to be laying our legacy bricks. We'll talk about those in just a moment as well. So, okay, so let's talk about legacy, because this is truly a public-private partnership. And you're going to see this number, 77 million, and you're going to go, holy smokes. And trust me, if you're a person responsible for fundraising, you're going to say more than holy smokes. Here's the bigger picture on this. So this port, the Port of San Diego, was required to do pier upgrades for years. They did a little bit of work in 2004. That hadn't been rebuilt. The utilities haven't been redone. The pier pilings haven't been redone since the 60s. They started the work again in 2017, and they ran out of money. It's a constant theme with Port of San Diego. They never seem to have any money. During COVID, they received some pretty significant grants from the state, and so they were able to invest, finally, $12 million, which is what it took, to redo all of the pier pilings on the pier and redo some of the utility work underneath it and reinforce different parts of the pier. That was going to have to happen no matter what, and that's that first $12 million that was committed. The next dollars that are being committed that the Midway is paying for is removing that building. So, like we just talked about, a building extremely old, There are parts of it that were cement that were over 3 feet thick, rebar that were only more than 4 inches wide. Just an environmental nightmare to bring that thing down. And requirement is you couldn't come in with a bulldozer and just knock it over. It had to be folded into itself. All sorts of environmental reasons, but also because the Midway has to stay open. Again, the reason we're able to help participate in projects like this and community stuff is because of our gate and ticket attendance. If the Midway has to close and that revenue doesn't come in, it's going to create a really, really, really tough financial strain on the organization and really the quality of this park. So keeping the park, or just keeping the museum open during this time was one of the requirements of all of our contractors. So we've been doing engineering work, permitting work, design work, now the demolition, which is done, although it kind of showed us how bad the pier looks. So now the top of that pier is being fixed. We've got all sorts of different holes in it. They're going to start doing what's called jet grouting, where they insert concrete into concrete, and it's kind of like, you know, that foam stuff that you put in and expands. Same thing with concrete. Instead of ripping out all the concrete, which would be not affordable, they're going in and they inject concrete and it expands to help strengthen the pier. It's fascinating, all the things that I'm learning that I really could care less about, but apparently it's very cool. Not in my job description. The biggest park item is that $45 million. That's our big number to build this park. That is an extremely inflated number at this time, and we did that on purpose because we're just concerned. We just don't know what's going to happen in the pier. It has a huge contingency in it. So when you see 77 million, just know that there is a huge contingency built in it on purpose. Unfortunately, with the fires in LA, those costs to rebuild are going to find their way down to San Diego through labor and through supplies, right? There's 2 costs that are driving this, concrete and labor. And those are just 2 costs that we cannot control no matter what we're trying to do in this park. Because this park is, no one's trying to add gold to this park at all. As a matter of fact, we tried to add bronze and it turns out it's way too expensive. And so we're doing metal and painting it the color of bronze, so hopefully you'll think it's bronze. It's really, the driving costs are really having to demo that building, reinforce the pier, and then labor costs that just continue to go up. Because it's a private partnership, it's still a public-private partnership, the Port of San Diego manages it. Everything, we have to pay fair wage laws, right? And everything happens through them. So you're always going to pay a little bit more than if the Midway was going to do this privately. But also, it would most likely be done by now, but that's a whole nother story. So committed is the U.S.S. Midway is committed up to $20 million. The Port of San Diego, 12. We have, actually that number's outdated. We have just $12 million committed in private philanthropy in the last year, and a $2 million HUD grant through Congressman Scott Peters' office. So $30 million left to go to raise, and we're doing that through private partnerships. There's naming opportunities. They start anywhere at $15,000. They go all the way up to $5 million. Kind of see some of the identity of the park, sticking with some of the port colors so we fit in their theme. One of the big things that we're doing that we're seeing a lot of success in is a legacy program. So you can buy a brick in the park. It will be there in perpetuity. They are $1,000, $2,500, and $5,000. You can honor your service, someone else's service. I bought one for my dad. I also bought one for my daughter. It's going to say something like, sorry mom, you wasn't around when you were growing up, but I was building this park. Forgive me. And they're going to be laid in that John Fenn Parade Ground area. These are really special because we're seeing them from people all over the country. A lot of course, Midway folks have been purchasing them and docents and stuff, but also people just honoring service in general, community service. The cool thing about this is that when you buy a brick, you get a brick. For some reason, there's been a little disconnect. We're up to 18 phone calls now about how come you sent me my brick? Do I need to install it? No, you don't. You don't need to install your own bricks, although it probably would have saved us some money if you did. You get your own keepsake replica with your purchase. So I was able to get one for my dad last year for Father's Day and give it to him. It was pretty special, pretty exciting. He is very excited. He said, no, when they install them, do I need to come down and sign autographs? Ha ha ha. Dad jokes. So yes, you and 4,000 people are going to need to be able to be down there. So an estimated timeline, so this conversation started in 2004. It really started to get going in 2017. Can't believe that, how long it's been. In 2023 is when we got our first conditional use permit. Last year, demo started, the pier pilings were complete, and we're moving into this year, cleaning off the pier, cleaning it up, starting that jet routing, replacing all the water utilities underneath. The park is currently scheduled to open for the end of 2027, and right now, believe it or not, everything has been on track and slightly under budget. It's unbelievable, just keep knocking on wood. None of that matters. When we get to the construction phase, it's all gonna go away. But as of right now, we're on track, a little ahead of schedule and slightly under budget, which is great. The next steps will be the jet grouting, the underneath replenishment of the different water lines, and then we'll move into our next contract, our last contract phase. The Port of San Diego this year, when we finalize all of our engineering plans, we'll go out and put out an RFP for folks to bid on it. And then once those come through and the contractors qualified, they will be on the pier by the end of this year and really kind of get going January of next year. And it's scheduled to take 2 years to finish the park. Our permit expires in February of 2028. So we have to be done by February 2028, although we're not really sure what the Coastal Commission is going to do to us. We don't know. But we're willing to take that risk if we need it. But right now, everything seems to be tracking because we've really done all the dirty stuff, the underneath stuff. We're hoping all the underneath stuff of the pier is really kind of the stuff that was going to take the longest. Yeah?
Does the Midway require any superstructure maintenance in regard to dry docking?
No, we will never dry dock for the Midway itself.
So what happens with the superstructure in the water?
The Midway is the most well-maintained ship in the historical fleet. So we clean it every year. There's a hull cleaning that happens and a hull density test that happens. So every year we'll go in on the inside of the ship. Just recently we took out about 3 feet of water in our bottom floor. Yeah, 17 stories that ship is. And pumped it out because we have density issues along with the thinness of the hull. Yeah, but every year that's protected every year. It's about a $300,000 endeavor. It takes 3 months. Every year they go down. You never can see it happening. They're all under there. Along with the Navy SEALs who train on our ship, you never see them either. All of a sudden they just pop up on the water. Yeah, so this is the schedule. And these are kind of some of the questions that I get that I just love to get ahead of. Who owns Navy Pier? We don't. Port of San Diego. Why are we taking the lead on this? The Port of San Diego doesn't have the funds and the resource to do this. If they were the only ones leading this charge, we would get a really beautiful parking lot, potentially. If you saw the first drawings, that's what it was. It was a gorgeous parking lot. It was really beautiful. Your cars would have loved it. It would not be a park, and it definitely wouldn't be a park with any experimental, engaging activity in it. And that's really what we want as the Midway. So we made this decision to take this on, and we're going to commit to it, and we're going to get it done. What happens to parking? Huge question that happened. That parking is not ours. That parking does not belong to the Midway. It belongs to the Port of San Diego and managed through ACE. We just kind of get the luxury of it. And actually, most people that park there in that pier do not go to the Midway. Most of our traffic is foot traffic. Most of that parking is for all the other things happening down on the Embarcadero. So the parking is going to go to about 100 spaces from just over 400. We'll retain some on our leasehold area for our volunteers. And then directly across the street, I don't know if you've been watching what's happening down there, there's a huge structure that went up, 7 different buildings. Maybe you've read about it in the newspaper, called IQHQ. A developer came in, Manchester bought the property from the Navy, maybe you remember that, bought the lease, built the new Navy Region Southwest building in trade for the property. He turned around and sold it to a developer, and they developed what's called a biotech. It's 7 different buildings, and they're specially built for biotech companies, which means it is a much higher end HVAC system, fire suppression system, because of what biotech companies do, right? Labs and stuff. So that has those buildings, they're really beautiful. If you haven't been down there, there's artwork in them, there's a park, there's a conference center that looks out over the water. Below them is 40 retail spaces, new restaurants, new retail. I asked for a CVS, a Nordstrom's Rack, a dry cleaner. Turns out we're getting things like Gucci, Rivian, kind of a little over the Midway's head, but we tried. But definitely some fun new restaurants and stuff. And underneath them is 3 stories worth of public parking. So they dug all the way down, and there's over 2,600 spaces. We will rent spaces over there. Our employees park off-site, and so we'll reserve those spaces for volunteers, for guests, for employees. So once we had what we knew directly across the street, we were going to have more parking. That also helped move this project along. We had to do this. And California Coastal Commission, we started 3 years ago negotiating parking. We started at 0. 0 for our volunteers, 0 for our visitors, 0 for our school buses. And when we finally had the conversation with how do you think a business operates? We have to bring in trucks for supplies. We have to be able to have ingress and egress for emergencies and school bus. So this is where we got to those 100 spaces. Again, they're not ours, they're public. They'll be managed through the Port of San Diego, and we don't know what parking company they'll use, if any. They might just do metered. Who will maintain the park? This is a big one. The USS Midway and the Port of San Diego.
Before you leave parking,
Sure.
is the one across the street going to be ready before winter 2027?
It's already ready.
Oh, it's ready?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
ready.
perfect.
Yeah, they're just now in the process of starting to add their tenants, and yeah, it probably won't be fully, the buildings are done, but they probably won't have their tenants, all of them. It's 7 million square feet of, it's huge. They are huge facilities down there.
But the parking will be ready.
But yeah, it's already done. Yeah. We'll maintain it at 50%. We agreed to maintain that. And why is that? Because we love the Port of San Diego. They're great partners, but their level of maintenance is not the standard that the Midway has. We are investing a lot of money. We're asking our donors and our supporters to invest a lot of money. We recently had our second water main pipe break. We have a backup water for the Midway, and we told our landlord, and they said, we'll put it on a list and we should get to it in 2028. It's our backup water. We said, nope. We went out and fixed it. So we just know that we want to make sure that we are invested in what happens out there, and that our investment is well taken care of, as well as our donors, right? Will there be security? Absolutely. You know, we know that there are security issues down along the Embarcadero, although the more that it's being redeveloped, the less that has been, which is nice. But we'll lean into security as much as we need to. We'll have our own security system, so will the port, so will the harbor police. It will be the safest place to be in San Diego. And if we need to have overnight 24-hour security, we will, for sure. Will there be events? Yes. The permit only allows up to 15% of days, which is about 52 days a year, if you can go get a permit for events that are 25 people or more. We imagined people are going to want to maybe get married down at the end of the pier, right? It's going to be a lot less expensive than getting married along the water anywhere else. We imagine someone's going to want to do a food truck event, right? The things that you kind of see that happen down by the county building, we imagine potentially there's a protest that starts, and they want to start at Freedom Park, right, or end there. Or the Veterans Day Parade starts or ends there, right? But those are all permanent events that happen through the port, and they're not allowed to have that many of them. It has to be open to the public. And will we close during construction? No. I guess unless the pier collapses, we might have to, but we're hoping that doesn't happen. So no, we will not close, and that's one of the requirements of the contractor, which is, again, why it's going to take a little bit longer. We'll have to do it in shifts and stages so we can continue to manage our special events. One thing people don't know is that the Midway does anywhere between 500 and 700 events a year. The 365 days in the year, we're closed 2 days a week. How do we do that? We do sometimes 3 a day military events. So you can come onto the ship, retirement ceremonies, change of command ceremonies, we do those every single day. Between that and then corporate events, the Midway itself only does a handful of events a year, but otherwise it's corporate events. And so making sure that we have the operations to do that, because it represents about 20% of our revenue. We need to be able to do that even while this park is being built. That's Freedom Park. One new development that has not been added to this slide yet is, does anyone know the name Malin Burnham? Yeah. So Malin Burnham is a co-founder of bringing the Midway. He was the first board chair of the museum and of the foundation, and one of the first donors to help bring the Midway to San Diego. Malin's 97 years old, and believe it or not, as sharp as ever. Recently, through one of the naming opportunities for the pier is to name the park itself, or at least to name the pier. We had to go out and get pretty creative, the Midway did, because we have to come up with, basically, we have to raise about $45 million. So one of the things we did is we looked at naming opportunity for the pier, and which was $10 million. After negotiations with the port and having some issues go head to head with the donor that came up that wanted to name it that they weren't a big fan of, we went back to the table and we said, we know we're gonna end up committing more money to this. Why don't we leverage the dollars that we're gonna commit, and why don't we honor one of our founders? So just recently, we started a campaign called Matching for Malin. The Midway is going to match up to $5 million, dollar for dollar, to $5 million, all gifts given in honor of Malin. And the park is going to be named Freedom Park at Burnham Navy Pier. So that's kind of the newest announcement that just happened about a week ago. And we're excited to give the Burnham family that honor. I don't know if you're familiar with the Burnham work in San Diego, but it's unbelievable. The Burnham family has touched just about every philanthropic endeavor here in San Diego during his lifetime and the family's lifetime, and just really remarkable man. His personal motto is service before self, and we're just really grateful that he decided to get involved with the Midway, and he was the reason we got to park down in the Embarcadero. He said, they think it's going to block the view, but the Midway is going to be the view, and he was right. So that's kind of our newest development for the park. But other than that, this is the direction that the park is heading and what we're really excited about. We knew we made a promise. We knew we had to do something. We just decided as an organization we're going to elevate the in-plan and really bring an experience down to the Embarcadero that makes sure we honors our veterans and that service, and that we celebrate how amazing this country is. Even in current strife, it's still just about the most amazing place there is to be. I know I feel very grateful to be here and to be here in San Diego too. So, yes, sir.
What's the role of the U.S. Navy and active duty personnel in the Midway?
With the Midway, there's no role. We don't see. We're not federally funded or anything like that. We're all privately funded. We have a really great relationship with the Navy, obviously, especially being directly across from them. Our aircraft carriers that pull in here, that whole area down there is considered a pretty high target area. And from a satellite, the Midway just looks like any other aircraft, right? They don't know that we're a museum. So we have a really good relationship with them from a security standpoint and from a training standpoint. So all sorts of organizations come on the Midway and train all the time. Anything from rust companies that are trying to battle rust. We think we know what the Navy's biggest enemy is, but it actually is rust is the Navy's biggest enemy. And training facilities and Navy SEALs, that's really kind of our relationship, is really less of a formal relationship.
Do they provide any funding whatsoever?
No.
I would just add to that. Well, that is probably true in a formal sense. One of the, I've been in Midway many times, and one of the things I always appreciate is the high percentage of your docents and volunteers that are either Navy veterans or actually served on the Midway.
Yeah.
So they're really knowledgeable, and that's all.
It's about 70% of our volunteers are veterans. Yeah. It's really what makes the place so special.
And a lot of them served on the Midway.
Yeah, it's really, our docents are really kind of what when we get those great reviews on Google and TripAdvisor, it's because almost a majority of them say, I had no interest in going on this ship, and I can't believe how amazing it is, the 4 hours I spent, and the people I got to talk to, the people that were really doing the jobs. Yeah, so we're very, very, very lucky to have them.
The other thing that's nice is having gone on the Midway over a period of years, is that every time I come on, which is probably once a year, once every couple of years, it's like, oh, this was better than last time. You're always adding stuff.
Yeah, and last year we added a new, one of our newest exhibits, which is the first that is really hands-on, is an engineering exhibit in the history of fires and engineers on ships. I don't know if you know, but in '91, we lost 3 sailors on the Midway because of a fire. Our new CEO, maybe you didn't know this either, but we had one CEO, Admiral Mac McLaughlin, until 2023, 3. He retired, and our new CEO, Admiral Terry Kraft, was a sailor on the Midway, and was actually on the ship during that fire. He went on to be the CO of the Reagan and retired as a 2-star. So we're really happy to have a Midway veteran sailor as our CEO. He has tons of stories, and we're pretty sure his are true. We're not totally sure, but we're pretty sure.
He's Navy, don't count.
He's Navy. Yeah. We got a 70-80%. Like, yeah. No, he's great. He's very passionate, and he's all about these new exhibits. So we're doing so the engineering one opened last year. This year, in the middle of the year, a new CVIC, so the intelligence officers, that one will open. If you've ever been to the Spy Museum in DC, has anyone ever been there? The new Spy Museum? I went 2 years ago. The company that is working on our park designed and did the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and did the Spy Museum in DC, as well as a whole bunch of plenty of others. But it is really cool. It's really interactive. You start on the 5th floor, you get all this history that you fill out a little survey, they give you a card, and now you get to go interact with whatever the time or the genre was, and at the end of it, you get to take a little test about how you could be a spy. And what I learned is that the country is safer, that I'm a civilian. I failed every time. The first time I was like, no, you died, or no, you didn't figure it out. I was like, oh, I better take this more seriously. I can do this. No, every single time. So, same thing, very interactive. It's good, really operation during Desert Storm, right? And so they're going to give you scenarios about what's happening then. You're going to kind of learn different things, and then you're going to get an opportunity to try to plan an operation, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So very interactive, very cool. You'll be tested. You get different levels. You don't get fail. If you don't quite make it, I think they've labeled you Master Chief of Coffee Machine, which is what I would get. If I even knew how to make up coffee, which I don't.
You mentioned it. Is there going to be an app? Is it already available?
No, it's not available yet. We're in the process of making it right now. It's not an app that you have to download. It's a microsite. It's like basically it's a website. They love to use all these different words, but basically it's a website. You can either access it while you're there. I don't know if that'll be done through QR codes or different types of technologies, but you can also access it if you never come to Freedom Park, if you never came to the United States. You could still access it, and you'll be able to do virtual tours throughout. But yes, it's not done yet. We're in the process of making that right now. Yeah, it'll be really cool. I like the scavenger hunt idea for kids.
What's the average age of the docents now?
Oh geez, average age of the docents now is 74.
Changes every year, doesn't it?
Well, we're starting to see some 6-year-olds come on and 50-year-olds, and we're like, you guys are really bringing down the... Yeah. And actually, we just had a 30-year-old too, which is pretty cool, join the volunteer program, which is really cool too. Yeah, but you know, we still have World War II veterans, which is unbelievable. Yeah, not very many. I think we're down to 2 or 3. Yes.
Did you say a 6-year-old is a docent?
A 60-year-old.
Oh, 60.
Yeah, 60-year-old. Listen, 6-year-olds on the Midway, some of the youngest people on the Midway.
I know they're good.
Yeah. No, we love our volunteers. They're pretty amazing. They're definitely what makes the ship go. But we won't be dry docking. The Midway would not. If you ever see the Midway move, that is a problem, and it means it's not coming back. We cut off parts of our propellers and our rudders about 2 years ago because we were starting to dig into the sediment, into the sand, and it was putting so much pressure up, it was starting to pop part of our fantail. So we weren't 100% floating. And right now what's happening is with the tides and the weather, we're going forward and back aft 8 to 10 feet, and it's putting a bunch of pressure on our bumpers and our fenders and on the ballards, those things that look like mushrooms on the ground. So we actually have to have new ballards put on. And what might have to happen is we might have to get tugged out to then be brought back in and retied. So that'll be exciting. Who wants to spend the night on the Midway with no one really in charge of it because we don't have an engine, propellers. So we'll have to have tugboats come out and then we'll retie up because we're moving way too much with the tides right now. That pier was not made for aircraft carriers. It was made for all sorts of other ships, but not aircraft carriers. It's not really big enough, those bollards. So that's a project that will happen. We're doing all these projects while the park is messed up. while there's a mess on the pier, we might as well make a mess on the ship. We're adding a new elevator to one of our brows. We only have one passenger elevator to get onto the Midway. We need another one for sure as a backup. We're repainting it. Our chief engineer calls it Operation 50 Shades of Gray. Half of it's done. If you'll see scaffolding on the south side of it, it kind of looks like a Cirque du Soleil program happening with these guys hanging off the back. They're rusting it, or sanding it, getting the rust off, and then repainting it. So by the time the park opens, we really want the Midway to shine and make sure our standards are kind of up to what the new park's going to look like too. So a lot of fun stuff happening on the Midway. A lot. It's a very delicate dance of how we move things around and people.
So has it been dredging?
We're about 8 feet off the floor, so we're not as far off the ground. We're floating. We're one of the only naval ships that is actually totally floating. Most of them are embedded in the ground, which is also part of the problem on the whole. So that was starting to happen at low tide. The propellers were digging into the sediment and pushing that pressure up on our brand new Fantail Cafe area that we just built. And so we're starting to see some bubbling and some popping, and we had some experts come in and they said, you gotta take weight off of that back. We thought initially we were gonna have to take them off completely, but they figured out of just cutting off the bottom of them, and we saved that brass. And now we're taking that brass and we're working with a veterans organization that is sculpting those into donor gifts for people on the park. So that's pretty cool. Get to own a piece of Midway in perpetuity. Yeah. It's like it's solid brass. I don't totally understand it, but apparently the metal that we use then is so pure. We don't use pure metals like that anymore. That you can't even melt. No one will melt it down. It's too. I don't know why, but for some reason no one will melt it down. It's too pure. It's too vulnerable. They'll shave it. They'll etch it. But because it's just such a pure piece of, and it just, what we did in the 20s and 30s and 40s, how we built things. That's why that thing is still floating.
At low tide, how far is it off the bottom now?
Low tide is 5 feet at the most. Yeah, but we're okay. That's actually really good.
Did they do any dredging at all?
No, they did a little bit of dredging when we first moved in, but dredging is, you have to move the ship out. It probably costs about $8 million to dredge in that area, and the environmental, we probably would never get it past coastal to do it anyway. Dredging is really the last option for naval ships. Yeah. The eelgrass, gotta protect the eelgrass. We reserve a spot of eelgrass, about 12 acres of eelgrass that we sponsor and manage in Chula Vista to replace the eelgrass that we had to remove when the ship first came. Yeah.
What is eelgrass?
Eelgrass is the grass at the bottom that it takes up all the oxygen and cleans kind of the ocean a little bit. It's one of those things. Eelgrass. Yeah. Sealgrass, eelgrass. Yeah. It's seaweed. Yeah, it's really important to the ecosystem. Yeah. So, yes.
Is the ship anchored?
It's tied. It's moored. So it's tied to those bollards,
Oh, okay.
and that's what's moving. That's why it's moving so much. It doesn't have enough of those bollard ties. It did, but the weather, our weather's changing. Yes.
For us sports fans, might there be another San Diego State basketball game?
There will never be a San Diego State basketball game. The players hated it. Way too much wind. Yeah, way too much wind. And so players did not like it. No, there won't be, unfortunately. It's a lot of work. So do you remember when Top Gun Maverick came to town? So we've only closed the ship three times in the history of 20 years. And we just celebrated our 23rd last year and had our 20 millionth visitor on the ship. One of those times was when we had Top Gun Maverick because of the amount of equipment we had to bring on and because of Tom Cruise and his security situation. That was pretty impressive to see that scale because I wasn't there when they did the basketball game. But I heard everyone loves it. It's everyone's favorite. We get asked that all the time. But no, the players, the coaches hated it. We thought it was a great visual, but apparently the people actually playing the game did not like it at all.
Well, that was on the deck?
That was on the flight deck.
Like, then on the hangar deck?
Yeah. Oh, the noise. You would never. You'd have to. The noise in that hangar bay is way too much. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's a neat ship. If you've never been to an event on the Midway up on the flight deck, it's pretty cool to see all the lights and the view, especially Coronado and stuff. Yeah, it's really cool. Yes.
It's absolutely incredible to see the amount of visitors there. Jerry and I were some of the people in the little office across from Anthony's at the Holiday Inn,
Yeah?
planning for the Midway to come.
Oh, wow.
And we actually consulted with lawyers to ask how much trouble would we be in when we were lying to say that 10,000 people would visit the ship in a year's time. And that was what we were applying to, to get
Yeah.
grants and things for.
Yeah.
And so we were scared that we were going to jeopardize the project, saying that 10,000 people would come.
Yeah, oh, wow. So the California Coastal Commission was quoted as saying they might see 300,000 people a year, and then in a couple of years, they won't be able to sustain themselves. So we'll have to tow them away, and of course, that'll cost the city and the state. And we saw 600,000 people our first year, and that was when we were still putting in bathrooms and stairs and ladders. Yeah, so.
You're saying that if they got, what did they tell you, something you have to tow them?
They say we'd be lucky if we got 300,000 visitors a year, which would not be able to, we would not be able to operate at that. It wouldn't bring in enough money.
Oh, I see. And you got 600.
Yeah. Yeah.
We never even dreamed that big.
I know, can you
As we
believe that? Yeah, and our peak year was 2017 and we had 1.4 million visitors.
Oh my God.
I know. The Guggenheim sees 750,000 on a good year. Yeah, it's crazy. It's that little old ship that could. And now that the building's gone, people you can actually see it. We've heard that, especially people that come off the cruise ships, think it's an active duty ship because that building looks old and governmental, official, or it did. And they didn't really understand the landscape of San Diego and the harbor and stuff, which is fine. And now it's like, oh, okay, there's something, what is that? There's a museum down there. So it's been pretty cool. Yeah, to see that come down.
What was attendance during COVID?
So in 2020, we closed a total of 10 months. I think we got down to 2020, I think was like 300,000, 400,000, and then the following year was 700,000, and then 2022 was about between 800 and 900, so we've been slowly coming back. What we're not seeing, so we're back up to COVID numbers, pre-COVID numbers, but what we're not seeing is the Asian market. So they represent about 20 to 30% of our attendance, so our attendance would be a lot higher, but that market, especially China, they're not allowing folks to really fly out of China, and definitely not big fans of Chinese flights into the United States. So what a lot of the Asian countries are doing is they're flying into other places like India and then taking flights from there. But they're also seeing visas take like 18 months to get a visa to get out of China. So our Asian markets are really, really kind of slowly coming back. We don't anticipate to see those numbers really change until hopefully 2026, but who knows, maybe later now. Yeah, so those numbers would be higher. Yeah.
You get a lot of people from Vietnam, huh?
Yes, we do. It's interesting, our tour is in 7 different languages. You hear all the languages throughout any day. There's so many different languages from all over the world on any given day. It's very cool, it's very neat to see.
So the woman that didn't know who Bob Hope was, is she still hopeless?
She's still on the team, she didn't get fired.
But she's pretty young.
Yeah, she's pretty young. She's probably, how old is she? She's probably 26, 25.
So she's not totally hopeless?
No, she's not totally hopeless, not yet. Yeah.
For those who are interested in buying bricks or contributing, what's
Really great. So we ran out of these. We're in the middle of reprinting them. One of the things is a lot of this information we did last year, and the budget numbers and things are different. So this is online. If you go to midway.org and you go to Freedom Park, there's also a video, a fly-through of the park, which is really cool. Kind of makes it 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional, which is cool. And then there's a place to purchase the bricks. If you're interested in buying a brick, I would suggest you wait another week. President's Day weekend, there's a little promotion happening. And you can purchase them right there online. The link takes you to where you fill it all out, and get your brick ordered. It takes about 6 weeks to get your actual brick in the mail. Yeah. Yeah, pretty cool. Sorry, we only have, literally, those are my last 3. But, yeah.
So when will those bricks be laid?
The bricks, so it's a really good question. So the bricks will be laid, they'll be obviously open by the time park opens. We won't know until the contractor comes on board what phase. That front part of the park is one of the first phases. We're trying to not put any of the bricks, any of the monuments in till the last possible minute, as you can imagine. The good thing about these bricks are the technology has really changed. They now, they sandblast them, but then they fill them with epoxy. So they last forever, which is nice, but we still don't want to put them in until we absolutely have to. Yeah. So earliest they would go in would be maybe spring 2027, maybe. Yeah, I would hope we could wait even longer, but contractors are in charge of that. Any other questions?
Is there a limit on how many bricks will be sold?
We can fit, depending on the sizes, we could potentially fit up to 4,000. We've sold about just over 500. We just started selling them. So yeah, there will be a limit. And that's the only area that they can go in. They can't go on the Footsteps of Freedom. This is all stuff I get to learn. Path, which is originally where we thought we'd put them, is because those have to go into concrete, those pavers, because that has to be a utility road. We have to be able to bring fire trucks and stuff, emergency vehicles down that, and you can't, then we couldn't be able to pop them out at all if they ever got broken or something, whereas we're going to put them in sand in the park where that's not going to be an area where cars would be able to drive. You learn all sorts of things about moles underneath piers and about which part of the flag at the end, the engineering that has to go underneath it. One of the other reasons we couldn't go taller at the flag, the pier wouldn't be able to stand, the amount of engineering we'd have to do underneath the pier just for the flag, not way too expensive. So all sorts of interesting things that we've learned along the way, that I've learned along the way. Yeah, and have to keep track of all of our engineers. Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. You're on.